Good morning, everyone. Great to be with you on this Friday morning. The weekend is here, and I'm going to get out of here in just a second. Right after the show, I'm headed north to be with some friends and family in Huntsville, so I have a big weekend. I know that a lot of you, because it is December, and because of that, a lot of you have similar plans, and so I certainly do hope that you all have safe travels. I hope that you have a great time with your friends and family. This is the season to be around them, and I hope that you are able to enjoy yourself as much as I know that I'm going to this weekend. A big day for a number of reasons, including the release of Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo Switch, which I'm looking forward to. But far, far more important of that, outweighing that by great lengths, is something else that I did want to mention. Today is, of course, the anniversary of the day that will live in infamy. And we were just talking not long ago at all about some of the things that were going on in World War II because of the death of George Herbert Walker Bush. And I am sad to say, for the first time in our nation's history, on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, there will be no survivors from Pearl Harbor present. There are 5 people that survived the bombing of the USS Arizona. But because of their age, none of them were healthy enough to travel. And their numbers have been dwindling for some time. And as much as I hate to say it, because I have one in my family, they're not going to be around much longer. The World War II veterans are disappearing at a rapid pace. And within the span of just a few years, there is a good chance there will not be a World War II vet left. And so we certainly do pray for them and the families that are going to be with them, but that's how time works. That's how this world works. Eventually, I mean, we have no more Civil War veterans anymore. We have no Revolutionary War veterans anymore, and that's the natural progression of things. 100 years from now, we're not going to have any Vietnam veterans, for example. But for those of you who do have people that you know, people that you have in your family that are World War II veterans, cherish them, because their generation will not be with us much longer. And it is a very sad thing that on this, I believe it's the 77th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. Impromptu math is not my strong suit. That's why I'm a communication major. But I think it's 77. This is the year that there were no survivors present at the celebration in Oahu for the celebrations, an odd word to use, the memorial of those who lost their lives at the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And we certainly do mourn for that, but we are glad that the 5 survivors that are still with us are still alive. They just weren't able to make it to the memorial on the anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So our thoughts and prayers go out to those families, and we certainly wish that they would be able to stay with us as long as possible. And who knows, maybe their health will improve, and we'll see a few of the survivors at the ceremony next year. I hope that is the case. But it does bring us a very somber reminder that the greatest generation is a generation that will not be with us for very much longer. So there is a lot of news to cover, and I have no idea if we're going to be able to cover even close to a plurality of it, much less a majority of it, but we're going to do the best that we can. And I actually had a different story planned to do first, but since we've been talking about World War II, I really do think that it is only appropriate that we do this story first, because since we were talking about World War II, and of course, someone who was actually in the Navy, George Herbert Walker Bush, who became our 41st president. The guy was a World War II vet, and we honored his life. You remember that I was going to talk about this yesterday, but unfortunately they needed the studio, and clients always come first, so I had to storm out of here pretty quickly yesterday. But George Herbert Walker Bush was laid to rest, and at his memorial service in D.C. at the National Cathedral, which, by the way, if you've never been to the National Cathedral, it's absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful building, and there's so much history there, so I highly recommend you go see it if you have not. It was one of the highlights, maybe the highlight other than Arlington Cemetery, of my trip to D.C. So I do highly, highly recommend that you check out the National Cathedral if you get a chance to go to D.C., but that is where George Bush 41's his funeral took place. His burial is in Texas, but his son, George W. Bush, another one of our presidents, gave just an amazing eulogy there. And one of the things that I wanted to mention is, this is the thing about the Bushes. I didn't agree with them much politically. I didn't like the kinder, gentler conservative approach. I liked painting in bold colors. I thought they were too mealy-mouthed and too modest and too moderate, and there were too many issues that they were really soft on for my taste. But I've yet to meet anyone or hear anyone that has talked to them and met them that has not said exactly the same thing about them. They're really good people. Regardless of whether I agree with his politics or the fact that he went after Reagan and before becoming his vice president wound up being one of his most bitter rivals and had some pretty deep-seated disagreements with conservatives and hardline conservatives like myself, I don't know of anybody, even in that camp, that didn't say George Herbert Walker Bush was a good and decent man. And as somebody who is a minister and has written his fair share of eulogies, and, this is kind of in my wheelhouse, I have always said personally that the hallmark of a good eulogy is when a person listens to it and walks away from it believing that he knows the deceased better than he did when he walked into the building. If you gave them an accurate portrayal of who that person was, and they feel as though they got a pretty good sense of the kind of person they were when walking out, then you have done your job as someone who was delivering a eulogy. And President George W. Bush delivered about a 12-minute eulogy the other day. We're not going to watch the whole thing, obviously. If you do want to, it is well worth your time. I highly recommend watching the whole thing, but we just took some of the highlights and some of the snippets out here, and this is edited for time. But I do think that it is worth watching and worth our time to take a look at this. And I'm not necessarily even going to do a whole lot of political analysis because I don't think that that's appropriate at this time. But I do want to share this with you, and I am going to point out some things. So this is George W. Bush eulogizing his father.
Dad could relate to people from all walks of life. He was an empathetic man. He valued character over pedigree, and he was no cynic. He looked for the good in each person, and he usually found it. Dad taught us that public service is noble and necessary, that one can serve with integrity and hold true to the important values like faith and family. He strongly believed that it was important to give back to the community and country in which one lived. He recognized that serving others enriched the giver's soul. To us, his was the brightest of 1,000 points of light. In victory, he shared credit. When he lost, he shouldered the blame. He accepted that failure is a part of living a full life.
Amen.
But taught us never to be defined by failure. He showed us how setbacks can strengthen. None of his disappointments could compare with one of life's greatest tragedies, the loss of a young child. Jeb and I were too young to remember the pain and agony he and Mom felt when our 3-year-old sister died. We only learned later that Dad, a man of quiet faith, prayed for her daily. He was sustained by the love of the Almighty and the real and enduring love of her mom. Dad always believed that one day he would hug his precious Robin again. He loved to laugh, especially at himself. He could tease and needle, but never out of malice. He placed great value on a good joke. That's why he chose Simpson to speak. On email, he had a circle of friends with whom he shared or received the latest jokes. His grading system for the quality of the joke was classic George Bush. The rare 7s and 8s were considered huge winners, most of them off color. George Bush knew how to be a true and loyal friend. He nurtured and honored his many friendships with a generous and giving soul. Last Friday, when I was told he had minutes to live, I called him. The guy answered the phone, said I think he can hear you, but he hadn't said anything for most of the day. I said, Dad, I love you and you've been a wonderful father. And the last words he would ever say on earth were, I love you too. To us, he was close to perfect, but not totally perfect. His short game was lousy. He wasn't exactly Fred Astaire on the dance floor. The man couldn't stomach vegetables, especially broccoli. And by the way, he passed these genetic defects along to us. Finally, every day of his 73 years of marriage, Dad taught us all what it means to be a great husband. He married a sweetheart. He adored her. He laughed and cried with her. He was dedicated to her totally. In his old age, Dad enjoyed watching police show reruns, the volume on high, all the while holding Mom's hand. After Mom died, Dad was strong, but all he really wanted to do was hold Mom's hand again. Of course, Dad taught me another special lesson. He showed me what it means to be a president who serves with integrity, leads with courage, and acts with love in his heart for the citizens of our country. When the history books are written, they will say that George H.W. Bush was a great president of the United States, a diplomat of unmatched skill, a commander-in-chief of formidable accomplishment, and a gentleman who executed the duties of his office with dignity and honor.
Well, there you have it. George H.W. Bush laid to rest and given this eulogy by his son, which, based on not only the way that he carried himself, but just the relationship that he had with his boys, I think that the president would have it no other way. And that really is a great snapshot of who George H.W. Bush was. I imagine that is exactly the way that he would have wanted it and the way that he would have wanted to be remembered. Because one thing is a rhetorician, and this is very difficult to do. As somebody that studies speeches and studies persuasive argument and studies, getting up in front of people and how you come off, it is very difficult. Very difficult, especially when you're talking at a funeral where everybody's emotions are in a fever pitch, to be able to do that with somebody's emotions. And what I mean by that is, you'll notice he took them from laughing to, just about to the point of crying, to laughing again, to crying again, and just goes up and down with it. And I gotta say, that is one of the things that you have to admire about President W. Bush. The man is a great speaker. And part of the reason that was so effective is because you saw how genuine and real that was. Goodness knows, I have my differences with George W. Bush, and I could list them. I don't really feel any obligation to do that right now. But I've never believed that the Bushes were anything other than patriots, because every time you hear them speak, you get the idea that they really love this country. And not only do they love it, they believe that it is the best country on earth, and they don't want to live anywhere else because they know that this is the best country on earth. And you got that sense from George W. Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, and even though I would say he's my least favorite in the family, you even get that sense from Jeb to a great degree. They do love this country, and they believe that what they are doing is a great service to it. There's times where I would take issue with that stance, but the point is, there is a lot of good intention there. There is a lot of goodwill. And you have to admire the heart of the Bush family, which unfortunately now with the passing of George H.W. Bush and Barbara is a little bit broken. But this is why I send my prayers and thoughts out to the Bush family, which are valuable and do have a great deal of meaning. I think that his son there perfectly captured who he was, because he was by no means a perfect man, nor a man that everybody agreed with. He was not somebody that was without controversy. But the guy was a patriot, a father, a family man, somebody that fiercely defended his sons and his wife, and defended his country in several different ways. From his service in World War II, to his service with the CIA, to his service as president and vice president. I mean, the guy just had a lifelong attitude of serving this nation. And even though there were times where I wish that we would have had somebody else in those positions, you can't say that the man didn't have a great deal of respect and admiration and a affection for this country that very, very few people can match. And so, rest in peace, George H.W. Bush. And unfortunately, I do have to take it to a very different note now, because there is some development with the story going on in Birmingham. So for those of you who do need an update and are wondering why those are few and far between right now, you know that I've been trying to stay on top of this story as much as humanly possible, but the truth is there's just not that much development. And that's something that I'm worried about, something I've complained about, and that I'm worried is looking kind of suspicious at this point. When it comes to the fact that Aaliyah and the other law enforcement agencies, the Hoover Police Department, so on and so forth, have opted not to share the video and not to share evidence, and it seems as though they're trying to keep a lid on it. Now, a lot of people, because of that, have attributed some kind of nefarious deed, which is a possibility, and I'm starting to believe that that is more and more possible the longer they put this thing off. But I do find it ironic that these exact same people that are claiming that there's some kind of nefariousness undertowing this whole thing, that there's some kind of right beneath the surface, there's some kind of nefariousness underneath. In other words, they're essentially saying that this police officer, who we still don't know the identity of yet, absolutely just wanted to murder this man, and he was bloodthirsty, and he was doing it for racial reasons. And they are saying that that's the reason that they haven't released the videotape, is because it makes the police officer and the department look bad, and that's why they're keeping it under wraps. That is a possibility. I don't know if it's true or not, but it is a possibility. And the longer they put it off, the more it seems like that may be the case. However, it is also possible that they have a very good reason for keeping this under wraps. Now that they have the man in custody, I don't know what that could possibly be, but they may have a good explanation. But I'll say this, regardless of what the tape shows, they better have a darn good explanation for why they've kept it away from us for so long. But nonetheless, that is the latest, and that's sort of where we stand right now, which is to say that we have virtually no new information whatsoever when it comes to the actual shooting and the evidence that's come out. We don't know a whole lot more about what happened that night than we did, frankly, just a couple days afterward when they released some of the details. And so it is really unfortunate that they are keeping us in the dark. Again, maybe they've got their reasons, but I'm having a hard time trying to figure out what those reasons may be. But I do find it funny that those that are attributing some kind of evil motive underlying all this are the exact same people that really would be pitching a fit regardless of what the tape showed. And the reason that I say that I know that for sure is because they're pitching a fit without the tape and not knowing what happened. And so while there are some people that might actually be sated by the tape, in other words, they see the tape and go, oh, the police officer was justified. Okay. Guess there's no reason to fuss anymore. There are some people like that, but the vast majority, and really sad as it is to say it on both sides, because there are certain people that, even though you know how much I love our police officers and support them and all of our first responders, but let's be honest, they're not perfect human beings, and they don't always make the best decisions. It is also entirely possible that this police officer either A, just flat screwed up and made a mistake, or B, and I know that this is what they are truly worried about, is that he actually does seem to harbor some kind of malice or some kind of wicked intent. I don't know how you would even prove that by providing the tape, but I'm just saying the possibility at least exists. I don't know that you would be able to prove that the guy was a closet racist or something like that unless you found, I don't know, correspondence coming from him to somebody else, or I don't know, you find a Klan uniform in his trunk or something like that. I guess that could theoretically happen, but I don't see that scenario playing out. The likelihood of that is ridiculously low. But what we're talking about here is it's those same people that are saying that would have reacted the same regardless of what the video showed. We could have had the video the night of going on all of the local news channels, and there are some people that even if the guy walked up to the police officer and put a gun in his face would still be upset at the police officer for defending himself. I mean, some of these guys are just political activists, and they have already made their mind up that anytime this takes place, the police officer is always at fault. And there are also people that are just as wrong to say that no matter what happens, the police officer never did anything wrong. Both of those people are equally wrong. What we need to do is wait for the evidence and see how that bears out. And unfortunately, there are some people that cannot do that. In fact, on Tuesday night, protesters blocked parts of I-459. I don't know why I can't talk today. I-459 and I-65 in Birmingham. And really, these protests have just become pointless temper tantrums thrown by a bunch of ignorant children that have no idea what they're talking about. I mean, I hate to paint with a broad brush that way, but at this point, the fact that this is still going on, despite the fact that there is no evidence for it, no evidence that the police officer acted incorrectly, no evidence that the police officer was racist. For all we know, the police officer could be black. We have no idea. No idea whatsoever. And yet these ridiculous protests continue, and they continue to harm those which have nothing to do with the shooting. Even if you were to assume, like these people have, that the police department is racist and there's systematic racism and this guy was only killed because he was a black person, even if you were to assume that, it still makes no sense to harm the business owners in the Galleria, some of whom are black. It also makes no sense to protest all the police officers, again, some of whom are black. It makes no sense to me to block traffic and keep people that had nothing to do with the shooting from being able to get home with their families or get out to eat with their friends or whatever it is that they're heading towards. It makes no sense to block them in traffic, some of whom are black. And so again, it seems as though the Black Lives Matter crowd, they only care about black lives being affected when it suits their political agenda. They're perfectly fine with inconveniencing or actually bringing harm in the monetary sense to black people as long as they get their political message out. They seem not too concerned with that. And so these protests really have just become temper tantrums, and they're protesting something that they do not understand, and it's affecting all these people that had nothing to do with the initial incident. Also, authorities have released a statement vowing to respect the right to protest, provided it is nonviolent. And they said, so the police officers are essentially just saying, look, if you're protesting and you're not breaking the law, you're just demonstrating out in public, we're not going to do anything to you. You have a right to do that. Protest all you want. We don't care. Don't break any laws. The second you start breaking a law, that is no longer peaceable assembly. Ergo, you are no longer protected by the First Amendment. The First Amendment protection goes out the window the second it is no longer a peaceable assembly. That's the wording of the Constitution. And so if you are blocking traffic, you're violating a law. They're not arresting you because you're protesting. They're arresting you because you're standing in the road, and that's illegal to do. If you're smashing in windows, which granted has not happened with the Birmingham protest yet, so far as I know, and I hope it doesn't. But if you start smashing in storefront windows like we've seen with protests of this nature in the past, you're no longer protected under the First Amendment because that is not a peaceable assembly. At that point, the authorities can and should disperse you. And this seems to be the idea and the thinking of the statements based on the releases by the Hoover Police Department and Aaliyah. So they also said that they would ensure, quote, the free flow of traffic. Good, but this is what you should have done to start with. See, this is the problem with ignoring laws because you're afraid people are going to be mad at you for enforcing them. When that initial protest happened and they started blocking the road, the police officers did not clear the roadways, which it is their job to do. And because they didn't do it, and because they let it go, and they let it slide, and they let them do it, now the protesters have decided, well, we're just going to block all kinds of roads and inconvenience people. You have to obey the laws, regardless of whether or not you think somebody's going to be angry at you for enforcing them. We saw the same thing in Baltimore, where the mayor was saying, well, we need to give them a platform to vent their anger. We need them to just be able to go out and destroy property and inconvenience other innocent people because, well, they're angry and so that's okay. No, you have a job to enforce the law. And I was very disappointed in the Birmingham and Hoover Police Department that did not do their job in enforcing the law that night, where they were just allowing them. You had police officers standing there, and you had a crowd of people blocking the roads. That crowd was no longer a peaceable assembly. They were breaking the law. They should have been dispersed. And because they did not do that initially, because they gave them an inch, they took a mile, and now they were blocking bigger roadways and inconveniencing even more people. And since it was on the interstate, I'm guessing some of these people don't even live in Birmingham, probably don't even live in the state of Alabama, and yet were inconvenienced because these morons that don't have anything better to do apparently with their lives are standing in the road and blocking traffic and breaking the law. You want to protest? I've protested before. I don't even think necessarily that you should have to get a permit to protest. You want to go out and protest? That is protected under the First Amendment. But the second you're breaking a law, then you are stepping over the line, then you are no longer under the protection of the law. And so it really is indicative of how little sense these people have breaking laws over something that they don't even know whether or not it was whether it was an unjustified homicide. And this is the reason that appeasement never works. Because the second that, like I said, you give them an inch, you take a mile. The police officers didn't do their job and didn't enforce the law initially, and now it's going to be much harder for them to enforce the law because they, at the onset of this, did not do so. But so far as I know, there have not been any attempted protests on blocking the road. Maybe I've missed it. And if you do know about any further protests that have happened this week since then, feel free to call in 860-1440 and let us know about that. But this is really where it all goes down to. Your rights cannot be used as a cover to violate another law. For example, if I engage in some kind of criminal conspiracy, I cannot claim that, oh, well, it was free speech. I have free speech, therefore it's okay for me to do that. So if I go out, for example, and hire a hitman and say, I want you to kill, let's just make up a name. I want you to go out and kill John Doe. Well, if I tell him to go out and kill John Doe, I have then engaged in criminal conspiracy. My free speech rights do not protect me in that circumstance because they're not going after my free speech. They are specifically going after my ability. They're going after the crime in question. It's the same thing with the Second Amendment, and you guys know what a big advocate of the Second Amendment I am, and I didn't even plan this today, but I happen to be wearing an NRA shirt. So you guys know I'm a big Second Amendment guy. When I shoot somebody, I can't claim the Second Amendment gives me the right to do so because the government is not prosecuting the fact that I own a firearm. They are prosecuting the fact that I had a firearm and misused it. You see the difference there? I could have the firearm all I want, but the second that I use that liberty to violate somebody else's right to life, well, then all of a sudden, that is going to be prosecuted. They're not prosecuting my right. They're not prosecuting the fact that I am exercising the right. They're prosecuting what I did with it. And that's the difference. The whole thing with fire in a crowded theater, for example. It's not illegal to yell fire in a crowded theater. People do that all the time. Don't believe me? Go to a movie that has a fire in it. You'll probably hear somebody yell fire at some point in that movie. You know why that's not a crime? Because they're not trying to hurt people. They're not inciting a riot. And so just because you can't assert that you have a right to something and then that justifies you breaking any laws in the process of pursuing that right. The same thing goes with protesting. You can protest all you want to. It doesn't give you a justification to break other laws. Just because you happen to be assembled in a group with a political message, that does not give you a free pass on any laws that you may break. And this is something that, unfortunately, some people do not seem to understand. These bold and brash protests prove that the people protesting don't believe the cops are bloodthirsty. Follow me on this one. These people are asserting that these cops are a bunch of bloodthirsty racists who hate black people and are looking for any opportunity to keep them down, to oppress them, and to kill them in the case of Bradford. And they don't believe it. That's what they're saying, but they don't really believe it. You know how I know they don't believe it? Because they're continuing to go out and protest and break laws. If they really believe that these cops were just looking for any opportunity to attack a black person, there is absolutely no way that they would be engaged in these protests, because they know they're breaking the law. They know that they're testing police officers. At some point, you can see protesters yelling, sometimes weirdly enough, even at black police officers, and yelling that they're Klansmen. If you really believe that this person who is armed, and presumably you're not, I don't know if they're armed in the protest or not, but presumably this person who is a police officer trained in combat and has a firearm, if you really believe he was just looking for any excuse to kill you or to come after you, you wouldn't be standing there insulting him. You wouldn't be getting in his face. You wouldn't be engaging in these protests and breaking the law intentionally. And so the truth is, even though these protesters can say what they want, but their assertion that this whole movement is predicated upon, that the police officers are really racist and just looking for any opportunity to hurt black people, they don't believe it themselves, because if they did, they would not be this brash and bold. And so it is funny that they're disproving the basis of their own protest by engaging in it. This is part of the reason, though, that I say that we need the tapes out now, because good or bad, it is time to rip the Band-Aid off. Good or bad, and again, maybe Aaliyah has a really good reason that I don't know about that they are keeping it under lock and key, but I don't understand what that could be at this point. And so, in my opinion, if there's anybody that's making these kind of decisions listening to me right now, I know that it's going to be tough, but the longer you put it off, the worse it's going to get. It's kind of like having a deep gash or a wound. The longer you put off treating it, the worse it's going to be. It is time to go ahead and get it over with right now. I know that you're worried about the political fallout. I know you're worried about becoming another Ferguson or whatever else. Believe me, it is better to go ahead and do it now than it is to hold off for a long time, because the longer you put off, the more it looks like you're trying to cover something up. So it's just my opinion, but I think that really is the best course of action at this point based on the information available to me at the time. So we have this new segment that I'm going to be debuting here in just a second. And I really like the idea of this because there's a purpose to all this. People on the right tend to be a little bit behind the curve when it comes to culture, because we're very thought-oriented, we're free thinkers for the most part. There's a handful of people that go with the crowd. But we tend to be more free thinkers, we tend to have more difference of opinion, and we tend to, because we are not necessarily as much connoisseurs of culture as people on the left are. I mean, that's the reason that they have Hollywood, that's the reason that they have a lot of the national news media, and a lot of the TV shows, a lot of the producers in that. A lot of the people in music tend to be very far left, even some country music artists. And that's all fine and well and good. Well, I don't know about good. It's all fine in the sense that they're allowed to believe what they want to believe. But nonetheless, this is why culturally the right tends to kind of lag behind the left, at least in that one area. We're just not as good at getting our message out in a culturally palatable way. And so because of that, I've been kind of racking my brain and trying to think about ways that we can do this. The preferred media of the left is memes and internet videos, things that are really short, very concise. And the reason is because their ideas do not stand up to scrutiny well. Because if you think about liberalism for more than about 15 consecutive seconds, most of the theories tend to fall apart. And because of that, they tend to keep themselves to very short media. That's why you'll see somebody who's really far on the left will have 97 bumper stickers on the back of their car, because they're short little jabs and snippets that don't require a lot of critical thinking. That's why when you compare that to the right, the preferred media of communication with the right is talk radio. Why? Because you've got to sit there and talk about it and actually reason out your ideas and give some rationale for them for 3 hours. That's the reason that while there are some left-leaning talk show hosts, by and large, you don't see that nearly as often. It is not a system of thought that lends itself well to a long format like that. And so because of that, I decided to do this new segment, which we're going to try to do. It's not going to be a daily thing like Daily Dose of Stupid or the Chaplain's Report, but, maybe a couple times a week at least. We plan to do this segment called Breaking the Internet, where we take internet videos or memes or something and break down why they're wrong and why they're incorrect. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and go to our brand new segment, Breaking the Internet.
I didn't touch anything, I swear! Oh! Ty, what did you do? It wasn't my fault!
All right, so our Breaking the Internet today actually comes via the Huffington Post, everybody's favorite liberal news outlet. In fact, it's Michelle Obama's favorite. She said that in a speech once. So the Huffington Post, very left-leaning publication, they put out this video that takes a swing at Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Yeah, specifically the little claymation Rudolph, the old cartoon that comes on. It's what, like 45 years old now? So, been around for a really long time. Beloved children's classic. I've been watching it ever since I was a little boy. My dad has been watching it ever since he was a little boy. And so this is something that it spans generations. People have loved it for a really long time. Every year they come out with new Rudolph stuff. And keep in mind, this is a movie that is over 40 years old. And it still has new merchandise coming out every single year. Now, I get that it's a bit of a novelty because it happens to be Christmas themed. But I can remember me as a millennial that's only 29 buying for my sister as a Christmas present the Bumble from the movie. She had little Bumble house slippers that I bought her. So it spans generations, a classic. People absolutely love this movie. There's even a Rudolph Monopoly. I mean, that tells you how much it's permeated our culture, that you can actually buy the Monopoly game of the claymation Rudolph movie. So anyway, everybody knows it's a big deal. I don't have to explain that to you. But because of this, for whatever reason, people on the left feel obligated to just attack things that people like, that people find, especially if it's wholesome or it teaches a certain set of values. And unfortunately, Rudolph is no different. So we'll go ahead and play that clip from the Huffington Post on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Hey, look at the beak. Hey, fire snow.
Hey, Ballpot.
Hey, Snow.
Stop calling me names.
All right, son, try it on.
I don't wanna. Daddy, I don't like it.
You'll like it and wear it.
Oh, but Daddy. It's not very comfortable.
There are more important things than comfort. Self-respect. Daughter, you should be ashamed of yourself. From now on, gang, we won't let Rudolph join in any reindeer games, right?
No, this is man's work.
Now, there's one thing I want to make very plain. No doe of mine is going to be seen with a red-nosed reindeer.
You'll never fit in. Now, you come to elf practice and learn how to wiggle your ears and chuckle warmly and go hee-hee and ho-ho and important stuff like that. A dentist. Good grief.
I don't even know where to begin on this one. So their chief complaint with the movie is that people are mean to Rudolph because he has a red nose. Yeah, that's the point. The whole plot of the movie kind of revolves around that. And this is a question that I've not been able to get a good answer from people that are upset at the movie. What do you want the movie to be about? How do you make the movie without Rudolph being ostracized? How do you make the movie without him and Hermie being outcast? The point is you can't. That's the conflict. That's the whole point of the movie. That would be like, and we're going to get to this in a second, it would be almost like trying to make Lord of the Rings without orcs, Saruman, or a ring. Okay, well, then it's just a bunch of hobbits hanging around eating stuff. Do you really want to watch that for 12 and a half hours? And Rudolph, I guess theoretically they could have made a version of Rudolph where everybody was nice to him, but that's the conflict of the movie. If you do not have conflict, you do not have a story. That's like third grade literature. They teach you that early. That's how basic it is. So if you don't have anybody being mean to Rudolph, if you don't have anybody treating him like an outcast, if you don't have people making fun of him for his nose, then the movie doesn't make any sense. There is no conflict. If everybody was just accepting and tolerant of Rudolph, then that would be the most boring movie on earth. It would just be a bunch of reindeer running around and having fun, and then Rudolph winds up being on Santa's team. So what? See, this is the whole thrust of the movie. The conflict gives Rudolph and the other characters meaning. It changes them over time. That's the difference in a flat character and a round character. Because Rudolph has to develop, and the way that he does that is he does so through adversity, and eventually becomes the strong, confident character that he is because he was picked on as a kid, because his parents didn't accept his deformity, because Santa Claus said, well, he'll never be somebody that can work on the sleigh. And see, that's the whole point of the movie, because everybody can relate to Rudolph. Everybody has been ostracized by somebody at some time. You've either been bullied as a kid, or there was some group of people that you wanted to be a part of that you weren't. I can't think of anybody, and I don't know anybody that hasn't been ostracized or marginalized by somebody at some point in their life at some time. Even very popular kids that were well liked, they've had it happen by somebody, either their parents or a relative or something. Because not everybody is accepted by everybody else. The whole point of this movie is to teach tolerance by showing you how wrong all the characters that are being mean to Rudolph for no reason are. Yes, Rudolph's dad is kind of a jerk about it. That creates the conflict. Yes, Santa's kind of a jerk about it. That creates the conflict. Yeah, Clarice's dad, who Clarice is like the only character that actually does accept Rudolph the way that he is, he's a jerk about it and wants to keep the two of them from being friends and eventually more. And that's the whole point of the movie. Everybody can relate to that because everybody's had a father-in-law or a parent that hasn't been accepting of something that they have, that for no reason other than it was different. And that's the point of and that's the beauty of the movie, and the reason it's a classic and the reason it's so popular is because sometimes it's that weird thing that people didn't understand about you or were afraid of it just because they didn't really fully comprehend exactly why it was there or why you did it, that turns you into a good person and actually gives you a uniqueness that allows you to help other people in a way that most people can't. That's the whole thrust of the movie. And so by going after Rudolph because of that doesn't make any sense, because it would be like making fun of a baseball player for being good at baseball. You say, well, it would make baseball a lot better if we didn't have any bats or gloves or balls and nobody ever ran the bases. Well, then you've just got 9 guys standing out in a field looking at each other. And if you took out all of the people making fun of Rudolph, that's exactly what you would have in this movie. A bunch of little clay deer standing in a field of snow looking at each other and not doing anything. It's just so incredibly stupid. They missed the entire point of the movie, which is to teach tolerance and to teach acceptance. You would think, if anything, the left would really love that movie. They might love it for the wrong reasons, but you would think, just on the onset, that the left would actually love that movie and praise it, instead of trying to say that there's something wrong with it because of what happened. So it doesn't make any sense. And actually, there's a parallel that can be drawn here with another kind of similar story that's going on. I don't know if you saw it, but last week there was a guy on the left that got a lot of flack in the media because he was saying that there's something wrong with Lord of the Rings. And the reason that he was saying this, and he's writing a study on it or something that wound up getting published. The reason he's saying this is because it teaches racism. And he's saying that it teaches racism because the orcs are just a bad race. Well, yeah, the orcs are a bad race. And he's saying because in Tolkien's world, the orcs are just portrayed as bad for no reason. And because they're just born bad, that they just do Saruman's bidding. He says what we need to do is Tolkien should have made them round characters, which goes back to what we were just discussing. He should have made them relatable villains that maybe they were oppressed at some point, and that's the reason they did it. The truth is, even though it's actually opposite ends of the spectrum, for example, one person is upset that the villains are not relatable, and in Rudolph's case, they're upset that the villains are relatable. In other words, the villains, the antagonist is a better way to describe it, not really the villains. The antagonist in Rudolph are Rudolph's dad and the other reindeer, and actually even Santa to a degree. And so because of all this, they actually take the opposite approach, but the core, the reason that they're attacking it, is the same. People on the left want to attack anything that is wholesome or good or portrays traditional or Christian values. And so they have to figure out some kind of way to make it evil or really wicked. Ironically, they do this because they don't believe in evil. They do it because they want this idea of conditional morality. That it's just subjective, and it depends on the situation that you're in. It's situational morality. Because if you're in this situation, maybe it's understandable. In other words, this guy wants the orcs to be somebody that you could relate to where, okay, maybe the orcs and what they're doing is wrong, but really you can kind of understand why they chose that path. And it's because they have this odd belief that evil isn't really evil. That when people make bad decisions that hurt others, it's not because they're really bad, it's just the circumstances of their life. This is why they believe, for example, in a lot of the welfare programs, they believe, well, those people aren't poor because they're lazy, and they're not poor because they're not skilled, and the only reason that they're poor is because they weren't afforded certain opportunities, and there were people that were oppressing them and keeping them down. There may be legitimate cases of that happening. But the point is, there is this overall belief for a lot of people on the left that that's never the case. You're always just a product of your circumstances. You're not a product of your choices or things that you did. Really, we're all just products of the situations that we're put in, and we really don't have any control over that. And this is what he's essentially saying with the orcs, is that the orcs aren't making bad decisions because they're bad people. The orcs are just put in a bad situation, and they're reacting to that bad situation. And if only, I don't know, there had been some socialist elected king of Middle-earth, then it would be fine because they'd be afforded the same opportunities. And this also shows a blatant disregard for Tolkien lore, because if you do know the background of the orc race and how it came to be, they're fallen elves. In other words, they were elves that were a race that was immortal and in a lot of ways even better than mankind, but because they made evil decisions and did terrible things and betrayed their fellow elves, they eventually became a fallen race. And that's the reason they look the way they do, the reason that they're all deformed and weird looking. That is a outward showcase of who they are inside. I mean, this is a race that engages in cannibalism and destruction. They will straight up eat children. That has happened in the Tolkien lore. And so this trying to rationalize their evil is an outcropping of that foundational misconception that he just believes that people aren't actually evil. And that really is, both of these stories are just an outcropping of the left wanting to destroy anything that teaches traditional morals or family values or something that is wholesome that a lot of people like. There are some people, for whatever reason, that if other people like it, they just want to trash it. They just want to destroy it, but specifically because other people like it. And it really is a shame. That's a really terrible way to look at the world. I mean, there are things that I think do need to be torn down because they're wrong and because they teach people the wrong thing. But I don't want to tear things down just simply because other people enjoy it. And I've never understood really people that do. So, there's another story, and since we're combining two stories with the Lord of the Rings thing and the Rudolph thing, we're going to combine two here in a second. So, the left, and we were just discussing earlier about H.W. Bush's funeral. Of course, all the current living presidents were there. You had Barack Obama, you had Bill Clinton, and you had Donald Trump. So the current president, past presidents, and of course George W. Bush was there because he was delivering the eulogy. So they were all there, and they were there in the front row. And I have to say, and I think maybe this is because Donald Trump has learned a lesson with the way that he treated John McCain, which is a good thing. It shows that he has the potential to learn. He understands the way that he handled the McCain thing was not good. And because of that, I think he was a little more cautious in his speech and the way that he handled some of his criticism of the Bushes. And I think President Trump has actually done pretty well when it comes to the way he handled the death of our former president, H.W. Bush. But it's weird to me that the left was just convinced that they had to find something in this whole episode that they could go after Trump on. And so the most recent thing is that they have criticized President Trump for not saying the Apostles' Prayer at H.W. Bush's funeral. Now, for those of you who don't know, and the reason that I'm assuming some of you don't know is because I didn't know until last night when my dad told me this, because my dad used to be Methodist. I didn't know what the Apostles' Creed was. No idea. And apparently it's something that is written down that you recite. I don't know. And so this is part of the reason that I don't understand this criticism. First of all, since when has the left ever cared about how religious somebody is? That I don't get at all. Because they're the same people that tell us that we shouldn't be religious and that we shouldn't care about religion and that we should just throw all that to the side and it should never especially affect our policy. And yet somehow they're upset with Donald Trump and talking about how evil he is and how not religious he is for not reciting the Apostles' Creed. Because if I were in that position, I wouldn't have recited it either. Not because I necessarily disbelieve within any of the words that are in it, nor because I want to be disrespectful, but I'm also not Anglican, and I'm not Episcopal, and I think there's a couple other denominations that recite it. I don't know. I'm actually kind of ignorant on this particular one, so I'm shooting in the dark here to a little bit, but I would, in that position, not have recited it either. Not because I want to be disrespectful or cause any harm. It's not something that I do. It's not something that's in the Bible, and so I would have refrained from doing so. And it's not something that would have been part of my custom. I wouldn't have begrudged somebody, and I think most people would agree that I'm pretty religious. Even if they may not agree with my religion, they would have to say that I'm very religious. And so this idea that Trump must not really be religious or he must not really care about spiritual things because of this, look, I've been critical of Trump's religion for a while now. I was one of the ones that was poking fun at him when he went to Liberty University and said 2 Corinthians because it was funny. And I don't think that Trump is any theologian. I don't think that he's a religious thinker. I don't think that he's somebody that thinks about this a lot. I mean, this is a man who once said that he's never asked God for forgiveness for anything because he doesn't think he's ever done anything wrong. Or when he was describing the Lord's Supper, referred to it as the little cracker and juice, which I mean is technically not incorrect, but it was very flippant, and that's why people had some problems with that. But my point in all of this is to say, I'm not somebody that is even defending that Donald Trump is a deeply religious spiritual person, because I don't think he is. But this particular episode is not really a good example of that. There are plenty of religious people that I know that are very religious, some that are very similar to me, some that are the exact polar opposite of me, that would have sat there and not said the Apostles' Creed. Not because they're wanting to cause a disturbance, not because they intend to be disrespectful to anybody, just because that's not something that their religion teaches. And so the left going after this is really stupid. And it is even more stupid when you consider that Tom Perez, who is the chair of the DNC, just recently said this.
They've had a big orchestra for some time, and they've got the megaphones to amplify it. Whether it's Sinclair at a local level, Fox at a national level. I've learned this from the outreach we've done at the DNC. Why are we penetrating, I asked. And I had someone in northwestern Wisconsin tell me, you know what? For most of the people I know, their principal sources of information are Fox News, their NRA newsletter, and the pulpit on Sunday. And it should come as a surprise to no one that our message doesn't penetrate. It should come as a surprise to no one that that person has elevated the issue, of course, to the top, because that person on the pulpit is saying, ignore everything else that this person has done and is doing. We have to focus on one issue of Roe versus Wade. And people buy it because that's their only source.
All right, so Tom Perez, the chairman of the DNC, so not like exactly a small potatoes kind of guy. He's the guy directly over Keith Ellison. This is the man in charge of the organization of the Democrat Party. And there he is saying that he has a problem with people getting their sources of information from Fox News, the NRA, and most especially from the pulpit. Now, Fox News, I get it. They're basically the communication branch of the RNC. I understand you not wanting people necessarily getting information from there. Now, I take the stance of you should get information from all places. MSNBC is basically the same thing as Fox, just on the Democrat side. They basically are the propaganda wing of the Democrat Party. And hey, I think people ought to listen to that. I listen to it. I show you clips from MSNBC because I think it gives us valuable insight, and I don't think that it's good to live in a bubble. But that aside, let's put that on the shelf for a second. And then he goes to the NRA. Again, I get it. You guys hate guns. You don't want people to have guns. The NRA does, and so you don't like the NRA. Gotcha. Really not anything unexpected there. And then he goes into, he doesn't want their other source of information to be the pulpit. Which there is such a seething disdain for religion on the left. And it just blows my mind. We were talking about this just this morning, and my good friend Ben called in and talked about this. Great guy, been a great caller up here for years. And one of the things that he brought up is that the Democrats are the ones that during the election, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney, when they put together their platform, they actually voted to take God out of their platform altogether. But see, this is even a step further than that. It's one thing for the Democrats to say, we're not really a party that wants to acknowledge God or talk about God. We're basically a secularist party, which doesn't surprise anybody. And I don't necessarily agree that that's a good thing. But hey, if that's what they want, if that's what they want to believe, they want to put it on their platform, it's their platform, they can say what they want to. Now they're taking it even a step further. They're saying, we don't want people to be influenced by their minister. We don't want a guy that it is his job to get up, and whether he does a good job or not is a different matter, but we don't even agree with, in principle, a person who is a religious leader getting into the pulpit and talking to them about issues. We don't want that to influence a person's behavior. And this is really a verbalization of a belief that most people in secularist society and which have found a home in the Democrat Party specifically, but unfortunately it happens on the right too. This goes to a belief that has been unfortunately growing and continues to grow to this day in America, which is you should compartmentalize every aspect of your life. And it's fine to be religious. It's fine to believe what you want to believe. And that's all well and good. And you can have those beliefs if you want to, but it shouldn't affect any of your decision making. You should be a Christian while you're in the church building. And basically, once your foot crosses that threshold into the world, you're part of the world again. You shouldn't allow religion to actually influence your decision in your day-to-day life. You shouldn't allow that to actually change the way that you think about politics, about social issues, the way you behave in your everyday life. None of that should be affected by your religious beliefs. That's really what these people believe, which, by the way, people that do that are not going to be saved. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but sugarcoating it isn't going to make it any less true. If you're looking at the gospel, Jesus did this constantly. When there would be disciples there that would be hanging out and wanting to be there to hear his teaching and eat the food, there were times where Jesus would just give them some truth and weed out and separate the men from the boys. where he would say, if you're going to follow me, you have to be willing to die for that belief. It's not just you're going to be slightly uncomfortable or you're going to get into an awkward situation once a year with your uncle at Thanksgiving. Not that they had Thanksgiving, but you see what I'm saying. If you believe these things, it is going to affect every single aspect of your life, and anybody that puts his hand to the plow and turns back is not worthy of me. Anybody that is not 100% all in, and this is your life now, and every single decision that you make goes back to a question of religion and serving me, if you're not willing to do that, you need to get out of here. That is what Jesus said to his disciples. And a lot of them ran off when he said that. Most of them ran off when he said that. To where the only ones left were a handful of disciples and the apostles, and that was pretty much it. And I also love the line in that particular story where he was asking Peter, are you guys going to leave? And he's like, where are we going to go? You're the source of all life. Are we going to go somewhere else and find that? So I won't get into the whole Bible lecture right now, but the point stands that if you are a Christian, and I would assume this is also true of Muslims and others, the DNC now has a problem with your religion affecting the way you think. They have a problem with you making decisions based on religious teaching that goes on in your institution of religion. And they've always had a problem with it. Now they're just admitting to it. They've always had that issue. It's just that now they're actually saying, yep, it's a problem for us. We don't like it. At least they're finally being honest about it. I will give them credit on that. But you do see this immense double standard here to where they're saying Trump's not really a religious person. He's not really the way that people say that he is, because look at him. He's not even reciting the Apostles' Creed. And then in the same breath, this happened in the same news cycle. A guy from the DNC, the head of their committee, saying, we don't want people actually influenced by their religion. You see the double standard here? Trump is just, as a personal choice, and I don't know why he made that choice, I can't get inside the man's head, decided not to say the Apostles' Creed. A decision that I, as a religious person and a minister, would have also made. And they're saying that that makes him a bad person, but this guy saying that no religion should affect you in any way. That's the way that it should be. And by the way, let's also bring this up. Rest assured that part of the reason that he is saying this is because he doesn't like the fact that Christians will not vote for Democrats because of Roe versus Wade. Which there's a myriad of reasons why that's a problem. Chiefest among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oh, apparently my camera was off. I just now realized that. Did that whole monologue without... All right. Sorry about that. So, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What's the first one? The first one is life. You don't have life, you don't have any other rights. All of your rights are contingent on your ability to exist. If you cease to exist, you cannot have rights, at least not on this earth. And so, if you do not have life, if you do not believe in the right to life, every other liberty is in jeopardy. If you can say to someone, we have a right to decide whether or not you live or die, or even saying that one person, in this case the mother, that is connected to you has the right to decide whether you should live or die, that undermines the structure of all rights. Not just life, but also liberty and property as well. Because you have to be alive to live. And so I can actually get to the point to where Roe versus Wade is the most important issue to me without quoting a hint of scripture. But nonetheless, of course, even if all that argument were to go away, I would still be against abortion because the Bible says that it's wrong. The Bible asserts that children in the womb are indeed children and have spirits and souls. They have a soul, ergo it is wrong to terminate their life. And so, if all that were washed away, my religion in and of itself would be reason enough for me to be against abortion. But nonetheless, because he asserts this is really the problem that he is having with people listening to their minister on what he views as what should be a secular issue and what should be a political issue, and that's the reason that we're not penetrating. Yeah, the reason you're not penetrating is because your arguments are insufficient to overcome that obstacle. And the reason is because if you're looking at the scripture, if you're allowing your religion to influence your decision-making process in any way, and doing so according to what the Bible says, then you're not going to be voting for a Democrat, because just about all of them support Roe v. Wade. You'll remember that, for example, that Senator Doug Jones, he said that he was a moderate on abortion and that he was a moderate Democrat, and that because of that, Christians would be able to vote for him. And then he voted against every single abortion measure, including the one that would limit abortions after 25 weeks. And we're one of only 6 countries on earth that still allows for abortions after that time period at the federal level. So, I mean, it is just absolutely ridiculous. Of course, people are going to be listening to their ministers and doing so. And here's another thing that Tom Perez has either conveniently forgotten or never knew in the first place. He probably never knew it in the first place. When it comes to the relationship that America has with religion, there was a time where the minister was not only a source of information and a source of wisdom, but he was the primary source of that. When this country was founded in the 1700s with the Revolutionary War, that war was fought largely with ministers. You can look back in the history of the Black Robe Regiment. You can look back in the history of the Enlightenment thinkers, some of the early ministers that were here in the pre-revolutionary era. The revolution happened. This country was founded because of ministers, and because people listened to their ministers and took their opinions seriously. Doesn't mean they followed blindly, doesn't mean they didn't hold them accountable, but they heard the words of their ministers who were charged with presenting the Bible to them, and they took it seriously, and they considered it, and they thought about it. This country would not exist were it not for people taking the opinions and the thoughts and the teachings of their preachers and ministers very seriously, to the point that they were willing to risk their lives to establish this country because of the things that they said. There was a time where a church was the cultural hub of a village, and it was not uncommon for there to only be 2 or 3 people in town that read and wrote, and usually the minister was one of those people. And so because of that, that's the kind of idea that this country was founded on. Not only is what he's talking about religiously abhorrent, but it's also completely un-American. To say that people should not be allowing their religion to influence their lives in any way. That is a doctrine directly from the devil. In fact, I just taught a course on the Screwtape Letters, and what he's talking about right there, making sure that their religion never influences their decision-making process, that is almost word for word straight out of the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And the reason that it's in the Screwtape Letters is because that same idea is also in the scripture. I mean, you look about the parable of the seeds. Jesus said that the ones that the thorns choke out the seed of the word of God are the ones who let the cares and the concerns of the world choke out the joy in their hearts for the word of God. So this is all biblical stuff. And for somebody that studies the Bible, somebody that is a Christian, this comes as no surprise to anybody. But nonetheless, we're going to go ahead and finish up with the daily dose of stupid.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
All right, today's daily dose of stupid, it actually comes from President Trump. So, nobody is immune to the daily dose of stupid. You can be the subject of the daily dose of stupid regardless of who you are. Who knows? Mike Lee might even be. I really doubt it with Mike Lee, because Mike Lee's ridiculously smart. But Donald Trump is actually the target of our daily dose of stupid today, because this week the stock market was hit very hard. And you're looking at the stocks, and this is not all Trump's fault. I'm not saying that everything needs to be laid at his feet, but a large reason, a big contributing factor to the reason that our stocks were hit so hard this week, and the reason that it took a pretty substantial dive. It started to recover a little bit, and I hope that it'll be fine. It's not a crash. We're not going into a depression or anything like that. But if you imagine the stock market like a plane, no, we didn't crash, but the engines cut off for a few seconds, and we took a nosedive and had to restart the engines and get it kind of back on track to a degree, and we're still at a much lower altitude than we were beforehand. And part of the reason that they were able to fall as much is because lately the stock market has been doing very well. And so because we've had a lot of success here recently with the stock market, it had a lot further to fall. And so that's part of the reason for the really big dip that took place this week. But the primary contributing factor, in my opinion, and the opinion of most economists, is tariffs. Because right now we are living under the threat from the Trump administration that he is planning to enact billions upon billions of dollars in tariffs towards China, which causes a myriad of problems. First of all, on the onset, it cost Americans a lot of money. Because if you are taxing Chinese goods, that means that you are going to necessarily see an increase in prices to the American public. Because do you really think that China just accepts that burden and says, oh, well, they're taxing us, then, well, I guess what we're going to have to do is just pay that tax. That's not how tariffs work. Just like everything else, they pass that cost on to the consumer. And so if you buy your clothes or you buy products at Walmart, which this is a really bad time for this to be taking place, guess where a lot of that comes from? China. So since it's coming from China, you are going to be paying more money. And because of this, you're going to see a decrease in sales, a decrease in the profitability of businesses like retail businesses that put out these products. You're going to see a decrease in the productivity and profit margin of businesses that buy products that are made in China. So in other words, they're not the final purchaser, but they manufacture things that China puts the parts forward. So this is unfortunately what you're going to see. You're going to see people, as we've already seen with the steel and aluminum tariffs, paying more money for products made with those commodities. And because of this, and because of these tariffs, and because this is going to cut into the profitability, you're seeing a dive in the stock market because they believe that businesses are going to be less profitable. So they're selling off their stocks, hoping that this takes place before Trump raises the tariff rate from 10% to 25% on Chinese goods, as he has already threatened to do. Now, granted, he has put it on hiatus for the next 90 days. But even still, even with putting it on pause, nobody knows where this is going to end. And he's been talking about making a deal and reorganizing everything. And he's even talked about doing some things that I really like trying to get something done over in China about the theft of America's intellectual property. And that I understand. That I'm 100% on board with him trying to do something with it. But unfortunately, like I said, the president has this unfortunate belief that tariffs are an ultimate good. In other words, he seems to think in his heart of hearts that tariffs are a good thing. Now, Larry Kudlow, who I think is a great guy, I don't know how he is personally, but I'm just saying as an economist, he's very smart. And he's a free trader. He understands it. He gets it. He knows that tariffs are a bad thing. And because of that, and I think some of his influence, Donald Trump himself has even said that the eventual goal is to get to zero tariffs. But see, he says things like that, and then he also talks about how great tariffs are and how we should be using them more. And it's confusing. And to be honest, I think the fact that Trump keeps going back and forth on this to where it's almost like that joke in Friends where they were sort of poking fun at Rachel. I love Ross. I hate Ross. I love Ross. I hate Ross. You're seeing a similar thing with Donald Trump here. I love tariffs. I hate tariffs. I love tariffs. I hate tariffs. Well, that may be even worse than if Trump were just rah-rah tariffs all the time. Because now investors don't know, okay, should I invest more or should I invest less? Should I get out of this before tariffs hit, or should I go all in so that when tariffs don't hit, then I'm the one that makes all the money? Markets detest uncertainty. They may hate it even more than tariffs, because at least if you know the regulations are going to hit you, you can prepare for them, you can brace for them. This would be like being blindfolded and thrown off a cliff, and you don't know whether you're going to be landing on a big cushion or you're going to be landing in water. Because you know that if you're going to be landing in water, you need to stay as straight as humanly possible and go in like a pencil. If you're going to be landing on one of those big stunt cushions, you actually need to spread your body out so that the impact hits you less. And because you don't know what's at the bottom, you can't prepare for it. And this is the conundrum that a lot of investors are finding themselves in. They don't know whether tariffs are about to hit big time, bigger than they ever have, or they're going to go down completely and we're not going to have any tariffs. And so because of this, because there is so much uncertainty right now, the market has no idea what the heck it's supposed to do. And to those of my friends that say, well, really, it's all a ploy and Trump really doesn't like tariffs, he's really, really trying to get rid of them. I don't think you can make that case. We've seen him go back and forth on this too much. At best, he just can't make up his mind on them. At worst, he really likes tariffs, but because of his economic advisors, he kind of gives lip service to the idea of free trade. I think that's actually the more likely scenario. And if you don't believe me, here's a Trump by Donald Trump. I am tariff man, capital letters. When people or countries come in to raid the great wealth of our nation, I want them to pay for the privilege of doing so. It will always be the best way to max out our economic power. We are right now taking in billions of dollars in tariffs. Make America rich again, all caps. I should probably read that again in all caps. Make America rich again. Anyway, the level of ridiculousness and absurdity on this is just, I mean, it's out the window. First of all, I love the new moniker that he has given himself. I'm Tariff Man. I mean, you can almost hear Black Sabbath in the background. I am Tariff Man, taxing Americans whenever I can. This is why Black Sabbath doesn't let me write their songs. But anyway, so every single thing in that tweet is completely backwards. First of all, raiding America, they're buying our stuff. Like if I go into a grocery store today and buy $100 worth of groceries, I did not raid that grocery store. I did not raid their produce and raid their whatever else products they had. I didn't raid their laundry detergent aisle. I didn't raid their clothing section. I didn't raid their milk. I went in and I made a mutually beneficial trade. I gave them money, which they wanted, so that they would give me food, which I wanted. They bought the food at a lower price, sold it to me at a higher price, which is good because that means I don't have to buy my own cow to get milk. I could do that because I was an ag major, but that's beside the point. It would be far more expensive for me to do that. So what I do is I go there because they specialize in getting groceries. I specialize in working and getting money. So because of that, we make this exchange and we both come out of the trade feeling like we won something. That's exactly how trade works in a free market. And it's how trade works between countries. One country says, we've got stuff that you want. And you have stuff that we want. We'll give you our stuff, you give us your stuff. That's how a trade works. And some countries are better at trading than other countries. Not because the country itself is better or richer, just because they have a competitive advantage or an absolute advantage. For example, does it make any sense to build a super expensive greenhouse so we could grow bananas in Alabama year-round? No, that's stupid. That's why we have other countries grow bananas for us, and we send them money so they can buy other stuff, and they send us bananas. Because bananas grow best in a tropical environment. We could grow bananas in Alabama, but it would be ridiculously expensive. It's much cheaper for them to buy it because they get the heat in the tropical environment for free. And so because of that, they have an advantage. That is not us raiding their banana stores, which makes it sound like a Donkey Kong game. But that's not us raiding another country's bananas. That's them having excess of something and being willing to part with it for something that they want, which in our case is American dollars. And then they use those American dollars to buy other American products. That's the way trade works, and it's the way trade is supposed to work. And so this idea that Trump has here, where he says that somehow this is, I don't know, raiding our great wealth of this nation and paying them for the privilege of doing, no. These are mutually beneficial trade agreements. They get something they want, we get something that we want. And the idea that this is the best way to make our economic power, no, that doesn't increase our economic power at all. Tariffs actually degrade your economic power, and the way that it does that is it hurts your economy and causes, just like any other tax, causes prices to be higher. Ergo, what eventually happens is you decrease your country's productivity and decrease your economic power. So just everything in that tweet was wrong. The one thing that is kind of true is that we do pay billions of dollars in tariffs, and that's bad. I wish that other countries did not charge tariffs, but the thing is, we're not paying that tariff. Just like we're paying the price as American consumers for foreign goods that were imported, their citizens are paying for it. So if, for example, since we grow an awful lot of corn, if we're selling corn in India and India is putting a tariff on American corn, guess what's happening? American companies are just increasing the price of corn that they sell in India. So eventually the Indians are paying for that, not us. They're paying for it. So even though there is kind of an aspect of truth, a little bit, to that particular statement, when you observe it and put it through a little rational thought, you understand that even that one is actually wrong. So it is unfortunate that the president seems to have such a lack of information, a lack of understanding of how trade actually works. So I tell you what, we're going to go ahead and go to the chaplain's report, and we will be done for the week.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
All right, Chaplain's Report today does come from the book of Ruth. Again, we've been going through the book of Ruth because there is just such a wealth of good information in there, a lot of life lessons, and it teaches us a lot about interpersonal relationships. Now, when I say relationships, I mean relationships in the romantic sense, of course, because we're talking about the relationship between Boaz and Ruth, but there's also a relationship between Ruth and Naomi, someone who's not a blood relative of hers, but is considered family. And so it just, again, my camera is not wanting to cooperate today. Sorry about that. So we see that Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, there is this interpersonal relationship between all of them, and also some relationships with some other characters as well. And the book of Ruth just does such a great job of helping explain some of those relationships and give us information that we can apply to our own lives as well. So let's go ahead and look at Ruth 2, 19 through 22. Her mother-in-law then said to her, "Where did you glean today, and where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed." So she told her mother-in-law, with whom she had worked, and said, "The name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed of the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and the dead." Again Naomi said to her, "The man is our relative. He is one of our closest relatives." Then Ruth the Moabitess said, "Furthermore, he said to me, you should not stay close to my servant until they have finished all my harvest." Naomi said to Ruth her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with the maids, so that others do not fall upon you in another field." So here we see this episode take place because Naomi has brought Ruth to her old stomping ground. She has taken her back to the part of Israel, to Bethlehem, that Naomi is familiar with. And the reason that she has done this is because that's where she used to live. And so even though this wasn't really Naomi's intention, she knows Boaz, and she knows that there is a relationship there between them. And because of that, she is very glad that this has taken place. So Ruth being with Naomi put her in a position to be near Boaz to bless her as well. She didn't send her directly to Boaz. That just happens to be where she wound up. And that aspect of it seems to me to be providence, that God, even though Naomi's the one that brought her back to that particular part of the world, it's God that allowed providence to wind up. It just so happened that Naomi happened to be in the field of Boaz, which Naomi quickly acknowledges. She says, "Wow, the Lord is taking care of us, both the living and the dead. His blessings continue to come upon us. That even my sons who are no longer with us, that there is a blessing in taking care of the wife and the mother that he left behind." And so God is not slack in his promises. He is very aware of the plight of Naomi and Ruth, and he is doing everything he can to help us out. And I love the attitude that Naomi has about that, because there are times that we in our own personal lives ought to just acknowledge, God really is looking out for me. God really is taking care of me. When we see something like that, we don't take credit for ourselves. We don't say, "Oh, look how smart it was for me to bring Ruth back to this particular area." No, Naomi says, this is God's work. God is working through his providence to help bring his will about. And she's exactly right in that. Now, what does this passage mean about others falling upon her in another field? Based on the context, I'm guessing they're talking about attacking or assaulting her in some way, maybe robbers or something. And so this adds a second dimension to Boaz's offer, because we've already talked about in previous chaplain's reports that Boaz is essentially offering her food through the gleaning process. And he not only offers her food, but he also offers her water. He offers her a place to stay. There's another aspect of this, because you'll remember Boaz told her not to go to another field too. He's already told her not to go to another field. And now Naomi is saying the same thing, which means what? It implies that Boaz is also offering his protection. Now, he doesn't know Ruth, doesn't know that they're related, doesn't know that the man that she was married to was one of his relatives. All he knows is this is a poor woman who has a good heart and is taking care of her mother-in-law. And because of that, I'm going to take care of her. I'm going to protect her. I'm going to take it upon myself, even though I have no obligation to do so, to make sure she is taken care of. So not only is Boaz doing that, he's also protecting. And so this is really the archetype of what a man ought to be. If you're talking about a man in the way that he relates to women, that's what Boaz does. He gives us an idea of who men are supposed to be. So we're supposed to be providers, as he's already shown. Someone that's willing to take care of the less fortunate and willing to take care of women, but also a protector. Somebody that offers protection, somebody that says when there are wolves at the door, I'm going to be the one that stands between you and them. I'm going to be the one that puts my life at risk, that puts my safety at risk to be able to do that for you. Because we realize that we are the stronger vessel. We're the ones that are charged with protection because of that. And men need to be like Boaz, someone who is very ready to protect the vulnerable, that not only has the capacity to do so, but has the willingness to do so. Because, guys, when other people in your life, and I'm not even necessarily talking about relationships, I'm talking about sisters, mothers, and just other women in your life, friends, not necessarily even blood relatives. The women in your life need to know that you are willing to protect them. Because that is what a man's responsibility is when women are around. We recognize that we're better equipped to do that job, and because of that, we have a responsibility to protect them when the time comes. It's incumbent upon us. And when you do that, and when the women in your life know that you're not only capable of doing that, but you're willing to do that, it will improve your relationship with them. You don't necessarily have to be a gladiator. You don't have to be Chuck Norris for your woman to know that if something happens, you're going to be there for her and you're going to do everything in your power to make sure that she is safe. I can tell you, this isn't like false machismo or chest beating or going out looking for a fight, anything like that. This isn't saying, being overprotective or trying to scare everybody else or not allowing her to have any other kind of friends, male friends. This is just having a consciousness that you are somebody that is charged with protecting her, and because of that, because you acknowledge that and because you care about her, that they have to really understand that you will be able to protect them and that you will do the best that you can to protect them if that need ever arises. One of the greatest compliments that I have ever gotten in my life came from Laura. And you guys know Laura. She called in a couple days ago. She was one of my co-hosts when I first started the show, back when it was the Patriot Preacher. One of the best compliments, I consider one of the best compliments I've ever gotten in my life, came from her. Because we were talking about a situation, I don't even remember what the situation was, that was going on in our little circle of friends. And I was mad at somebody and I made some kind of comment as like, I don't want anything to do with her. And Laura actually said, you don't mean that. And I was like, yes, I do. And she says, no, you don't. I know you better than that. She said, you know better than this, because you're not telling me that if something were to happen and she were to call you at 2 a.m. because she was scared that somebody was going to break in or she needed your help, that you wouldn't show up. She said, because you're like that with everybody. You're like that with me. If I needed something at 2 o'clock, if I was scared and I needed you to come by, you would do it. That was the best compliment I've ever gotten, and I was humbled by that. because I knew that she told me that other girls in the group felt the same way. That if stuff hit the fan, just as a friend, not in any, weird way, just as a friend and a brother in Christ, that she knew and felt comfortable around me because she knew that I was going to do everything I could to protect her or any other female in our group. I'd protect the guys too, but it is a little bit different. That's just how the dynamic works. And this is all to say, you don't have to be a superhero. You don't have to be bulletproof. I'm not asking you to be, and I don't think that the Bible asks us to be. All it's saying is you need to exude an aura of safety and protection. You need for other people in your life, especially women, to feel as though they are safe and protected around you. And when you do that, and when you provide that kind of when you come off that way, then other women in your life are going to respect you more. They're going to listen to you more. And because they know that you care about them in that way, they're going to be more willing to look the other way when maybe you make a mistake, and going to be more affectionate towards you. And there's going to be a rapport that develops between you. And that's the reason that the Lord charges us with this responsibility as men to be able to do that. Because remember, the perfect man, the greatest man to ever live, the archetypical man in every sense of the word, was Jesus Christ. And what is he famous for? Dying on a cross and suffering great agony to protect other people, to protect us from the fate that our sins and our mistakes would have eventually led to save us from our sins, to save us from ourselves. You see, that's the greatest feat that Jesus Christ ever pulled, and it was an act of protection. Protection and being a man go hand in hand. And once we realize that and we try to live up to it, it's going to improve our relationships with everyone, and most importantly, improve us in a personal way that makes us better suited to serve in the kingdom of God. Stay the course, friends.